In January 1988, CIA satellites captured imagery of bizarre man-made symbols carved into the earth in Laos. In Xam Neua, a northeastern town near the border with Vietnam that literally translates to northern swamp, the large letters USA were visibly hacked into a rice paddy, along with the nearby letter K made out of piles of rice stalks. The letter K was a known distress signal among US pilots during the Vietnam War, an intriguing suggestion that this was the work of an American still surviving behind enemy lines long after the Vietnam War had ended. The presence of these symbols raised an interesting and difficult question for the US government. Was there proof that American soldiers were still being held as prisoners in Laos? And if so, how could they possibly go about getting them out? When the Paris Peace Accords were signed on January 27, 1973, an end to the Vietnam War finally came into sight. The United States agreed to withdraw their troops and cede the war over a 2-year period, and in exchange, 591 American prisoners of war would be returned to the U.S. in what was labeled Operation Homecoming. Yet even as the 2 years passed and the 591 POWs were reunited with American soil, the fates of over 2,500 other U.S. soldiers who went missing in action in Vietnam were left unresolved, a troubling and lingering consequence of war. Many of them were pilots whose aircrafts were shot down over Laos and Vietnam. Though remains were never recovered, their records were all eventually changed to reflect that they were killed in action, a gesture that allowed closure to their families and their names to be honored. Now, in the decades since the war, there have also been quiet rumors of POWs who managed to transcend the symbolic label of KIA, Americans left behind, still imprisoned, that may have survived to this day. Years after the war officially ended in 1975, reports continued to trickle into the CIA's Southeast Asian headquarters in Bangkok that American POWs were still alive in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. Sources suggested that they were being kept in prison camps and used for manual labor on road and irrigation projects. Though many of these reports came without evidence or from unreliable witnesses, others arrived with enough substance to warrant investigation. In 1979, for instance, a Laotian informant for the Defense Intelligence Agency reported that 18 American prisoners had been relocated to a cave near the central Laotian town of Nahamarat. The informant, a man named Fimichuk, identified one of the men as a Lieutenant Colonel Paul W. Merkland. However, a search of military databases did not return any POW with that name. They did, however, find a Lieutenant Colonel Paul W. Bannon, a pilot who had been shot down over Laos in 1969. Pentagon analysts suggested that Merkland could have in fact been a slight variation on the word American, which Bannon's captors could have mistaken for his last name. Another CIA informant, known as W1, an elderly Laotian woman with strong ties to the communist leaders in the country's capital city of Vientiane, offered a similar story. On November 14, 1980, she met with her CIA handlers and passed on a valuable piece of unexpected information. A substantial number of U.S. pilots, she estimated 30 men, had recently been spotted working on a road near a labor camp in Nahamarat. Finally, on December 30th that same year, a Thai signal unit codenamed Team 213 notified the CIA's Bangkok office that they had intercepted a transmission from the Laotian military. Apparently, the government had ordered a group of American POWs to be moved from the southern province of Atopu to the north to avoid detection from the U.S. military. The National Security Agency confirmed that a mysterious, unidentified plane had left Atopu on the day mentioned in the transmission, further solidifying Team 213's claims, and CIA satellite imagery showed some kind of prison camp in the region the informant detailed. More intriguing still, the number 52 was seen carved into the soil near the camp's border, along with what looked like a large letter K. It was then that ears all across the U.S. government began to perk up. Given all of the information collected from various reliable sources across multiple agencies, the Pentagon went to work planning a possible rescue mission to covertly retrieve the lost pilots without reigniting hostilities between governments. The mission, dubbed Operation Pocket Change, was conceived with caution in mind. Only months earlier, the U.S. government and the CIA had publicly fallen on their faces during Operation Eagle Claw, a bungled attempt to end the Iranian hostage crisis that was scrapped due to miscommunications and equipment failure. A proposal to move forward with the rescue plan was brought to President Ronald Reagan's desk by his national security advisor Richard Allen. Reagan was reportedly eager to move forward with the plans. As designed, the operation would entail a team of 40 armed commandos descending on the camp, using trudges and chainsaws to break through any locked doors and escorting the POWs to safety. CIA surveillance of the camp was ramped up, though its fortifications prevented satellites and long-range cameras from capturing clear images of the prisoners themselves. In January 1981, the Joint Special Operations Command, a highly trained special ops unit established in the wake of the failure of Operation Eagle Claw, was brought on board. A miniature tabletop model of the camp near Nahamurat was constructed to help develop an infiltration strategy. There was also a plan to build a full-scale replica in the Philippines, where members of the commandos on the raid team could rehearse the operation, under the guise of a movie production company. Not giving in to the speculation and pressure, however, high brass at the Pentagon insisted that a Joint Special Operations Command team deliver solid visual proof that there were in fact American captives being held at the prison before signing off on Operation Pocket Change. The CIA countered that they should be the ones to send in a team, as they had operatives of Southeast Asian descent that were better suited to covert operations in the area. The CIA's team may have been better able to blend in, but was also inexperienced and lacking leadership. The team was headed by a former Royal Laotian Air Force pilot turned informant, whom the CIA placed a great deal of trust in. Adding to their personnel deficiencies, the team's equipment was outdated and prone to malfunction. Nevertheless, they went ahead as planned with their surveillance mission. On March 29th, they crossed the Mekong River from Thailand into Laos. It took them more than a month to locate the camp, and the mission began to go off the rails almost as soon as they crossed the border. One team member shot themselves by mistake, while another became seriously ill and had to be rescued. When they finally located the camp and conducted their surveillance, the reports back to the Pentagon were negative. Over the 2 days they spent in Nahamurat monitoring the area, none of the 160 prisoners kept there were identifiably Caucasian. This news came as something of a relief to the Pentagon, who had been having a serious change of heart. By the time the team had safely made it back to CIA headquarters in Thailand on May 13th, some of the details of Operation Pocket Change had leaked to the media, who were demanding a date by which they could start printing stories. The Washington Post notified the Pentagon's news division that they intended on running their story on May 20th, a deadline to which the Pentagon did not object. With the lack of evidence returned by the CIA Laotian team, they felt it was better to play it safe and call off the operation altogether, and exposure in the media would give them a satisfactory reason to pull the plug. But how conclusive were the results found by the CIA team? Later details emerged that indicated that they had not in fact spent a week monitoring the camp, but instead had only had eyes on the camp for 2 hours in total before they were allegedly chased off by guard dogs. Additionally, the photos they returned with were taken hastily from a distance of over 500 yards, and thus the ethnicity of any humans visible is undetectable. Ultimately, it seems the one attempt at infiltrating the camp and discovering what it held was sabotaged by a lack of commitment and personnel on the American side. It was the only post-war effort the U.S. government ever made to rescue its own captured soldiers, and Richard Allen now acknowledges that the aborted Operation Pocket Change may have been the, quote, best chance the U.S. ever had to find POWs still alive. That is, if there were indeed Americans still left to be found. Despite the appearance of many other supposed secret messages discovered by satellite, most were ultimately dismissed as natural formations. Now overgrown and invisible to eyes above, it seems that the real meaning of these forms may be lost in the jungle, leaving us, forever, in the dark.